You know, they've got their, you know, their fallout shelters, they've got their survival food. I mean, the right has always been like quiet, but we're going to prepare. So the left now is doing the same thing. The left is learning how to use guns, they're taking self-defense. So it's another form of radicalization. So we've got, it's like these forces are aligning that are somewhat troubling to some degree. Because people are going to want to assume power and control. That's Aries, power and control. So how are we going to work it out? We're going to find out. We are going to find out. And early on, like I said, we've got that Aries square, Chiron square to Saturn very early on this year. And Saturn and Chiron are going to kind of dog each other for the next 3 years. Kind of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So there's going to be conflict. It's just the way it is. Let's talk about people born during that time. They're Generation X, and I've done a lot of readings for women born during this period of time. And the women that are born with Chiron and Aries, they have a really hard time with power in some ways. And not necessarily other people's power, but their own. I have done a number of charts for women with Chiron and Aries where they have a lot of internal power. But they come off being bossy, they come off being hard-headed, and they get the B word.
Yeah, that's true.
So what happens with women with Chiron and Aries? They stuff it. They stuff it and then go to the other side. They go to Libra.
Yeah.
And they say, I'm just going to be a helper. I'm just going to help out. It's not going to work because what happens is it suppresses the power. It suppresses the B word. So then they actually wind up becoming that because they can't deal with the fact that they've got something to say, something to share, something to do, they got a mission. So they go into suppression around it, right? This is what happens. So women with Chiron and Aries are going to have to come to terms with this. This is their time. So it's like, screw it, you know, I'm going to kind of claim this, I'm going to own it, I'm going to be it, and I'm going to do my best to integrate this into my life. And I'm tired of having people put me in a box. I don't want to step on people's, this is it. This is what I've got to do. So they have to reconcile that. They also have to reconcile their relationships with men.
Yeah, it's both because they want to be in a role. They're stuck in that matrix role, but that inside's trying to come out.
That's right.
That's what's getting them.
So they have to reconcile their relationship with men.
Yeah.
Their fathers, their lovers, their brothers, and there has to be some degree of healing for all of that.
Yeah.
If there's been sexual abuse, they have to come to terms with that.
So they have to balance the masculine and feminine.
Masculine and feminine, exactly.
But how do you do that?
Well, sometimes you have to.
That's hard.
Sometimes you have to get messy, right? So if you, life is not always a graceful experience. Sometimes it's really awkward, and we make mistakes. But in those mistakes, they can be really, really enlightening. And I'll give you another example. I had a lot of anger issues with my father, right? A lot, because we had a very intense past. And one night, I was 30 years old, and he was just riding. My dad was a big guy, he was a military guy, he was a badass. And one night, he'd been riding me for about a week. And it was just after my divorce. I came back home, I was trying to find out where I was in the world. And he'd been riding me. And we got out to have some pizza. Me and him and my mom. And I got, you know those little gum machines you put in like 5 cents or whatever, and those little square pieces of gum come out? I love those. Chiclets, yeah. So I got some of those, and I'm in the back seat of this car, and we're getting ready to go onto the freeway, and my father's just riding me. And I got sick of it, and I took these pieces of gum and I threw them at his head from the back seat of the car. And we're getting down the freeway, and he slams on the brakes of the car. And I jump out of the car, right? It's a 4-door, and he decides he's going to jump out of the car, and we're going to solve this right on the entrance of the freeway. Right there. Okay?
There you go.
So now, I was young and spry, but I knew my father. You know, my father was a Leo, and he would say, he said it one time, if you strike the king, you have to kill the king. That was my dad, okay? So this is in my head, right? And this guy is getting ready to come out of the car and deal with me. And so he sticks his foot out of the car, and the first thing that goes in my head is, I'm going to slam the door in his ankle, I'm going to break his fucking ankle. So that when he gets out of the car, I can deal with him. And my dad was so quick and one step ahead of me, he knew that that's what I was going to do. And he brought his foot back in the car, and he slammed the door, and he shot off onto the freeway, and there I was. On the side of the road, right? So I go home, and so I'm thinking, like, my dad's got guns, what's going to go on? What's going to happen when I go back there? So I eventually go back home, and he's sitting, I'll never forget this image, he's in his bedroom, and he's sitting on the bed, and he's in his underwear, and there's the blue light of the TV, and he's just like, laying on his bed, motionless. And I go into the room that I'm staying in, and I just break down. I break down and I start sobbing, right? I get to all this grief. It just comes out of me. Because that's what's underneath rage. It's grief. So to your point, how do they do it? How do they balance it? The balancing comes when they deal with the suppressed Aries in their chart. So in essence, what they have to come to is some degree of grief and reconciliation. That's how the balancing in a homeostatic way takes care of itself.
So heal the pain within.
That's right.
Allow it.
That's right.
It's that allowing.
That's exactly right. On the male side, the men born during this time, what do we have? We have the rise of the metrosexual.
Yeah.
We have the Johnny Depps and the Robert Downey Jr.'s of the world. I think Robert Downey Jr. is actually older. But these are the models during that time.
Right.
So the men born during this era have to come to some reconciliation. They were okay with their femininity, right? Products and styles, they're okay with that. Designer clothes. They have to come to some reconciliation around their masculinity. From a collective level, there's a reconciliation happening in general. Men with Chiron and Aries are going to have to deal with their wounds around their fathers, around wars, around society in general, men, and come back into a sense of their own power, because men have been disenfranchised for a very long time. What's happened in the United States chart, progress chart, it's really interesting. Really, really interesting. The United States progress chart, Venus is in Aries. That's women, right? Venus is in Aries. And Mars, which is men, is in Libra, in the progress chart of the United States. So we've gone through, and we're still going through this very interesting shift and flip with energies. But men have got to be able to come back into their power, because it's been so, we're in Houston right now, right? We're in Houston. And who's like the big hero in Houston? It's J.J. Watt.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know what sign J.J. Watt is? He's an Aries. He's an Aries. And J.J. Watt is like Paul Bunyan. It's like all these kind of, American heroes wrapped into one. And he stepped up in a big way with the city and got, over $30 million donated to this city. And the great thing about J.J. Watt is that he's not just going to hand that over to the Red Cross.
No.
He's going to find all local, right? He's going to find the local way to move that money. The Red Cross is
Yeah, everybody's on to them. Everybody's on to them.
That is the word. See, these things happen in a very synchronistic way. We're watching and witnessing, right, this kind of heroic thing. And we're coming into Chiron and Aries. And if you look at, oh my God, I'm going to get on my soapbox over here now, okay? I watch a lot of TV, maybe too much. But I really pay attention to commercials. You should too. Because they're telling stories. A lot of the stories and commercials now that I'm witnessing are versions of augmented reality. So there's a new car commercial now. It's a Toyota, I think, car commercial. They use a song by Beck. And they're really marketing this car to youth. Because the car is actually like going through some kind of video game. It's like, ooh, is this car cool, right? It's hitting these like Nintendo kinds of points along a track. And this is augmented reality. That's coming, by the way.
Wow.
But the other thing that I've really been paying attention to in commercials is the disappearance of men.
Yeah.
The disappearance of men in commercials. I've been witnessing more and more commercials where it's either just a woman or two women together. It is not, the male energy is not being represented at all. It is diminishing, especially in car commercials. Before, you would see, oh man, here's a car. Men bought cars, right? Families bought cars. You saw a family, it was a car, it was a family car. You saw a performance car, there was a guy behind that wheel. Not the case anymore. Keep your eye on commercials. They're telling us a story. So we're witnessing the disappearance of men. We're also witnessing drops in fertility rates, right, in men. We also are dealing with glyphosate and all the other, plastics that are altering our physiognomy.
Sure.
That's also coming up in Chiron and Aries. We're going to deal with that. We're going to deal with the wound of potency and virility, right? Fertility. It's also going to come up. Another thing that we're going to deal with Chiron and Aries is the fact that Aries represents the body, the identity, right? The Atman, the original self. You come into the chart, you come into the first house, it's Aries. Chiron and Aries is also going to be not just about men and women, the masculine and feminine, but identity itself. The idea of what it is to be a human will come up for some form of debate and discussion during Chiron and Aries. We're already dealing with between 19 and 20 sexual identification points now. Okay? We're going to be going deeper into this. But we're also going to be going into the first stages of cybernetic hybridization.
Artificial intelligence and transhumanism.
That's right. That's Chiron and Aries.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely.
But Uranus is in Aries right now.
Uranus is in Aries now, but it's moving into Taurus in this week,
sorry.
this coming year, in May. You missed that talk yesterday.
I should have been here.
But Uranus is in Aries, and we've been talking about this with Uranus and Aries, right? We've been talking about, we've been dealing with it. Caitlyn Jenner, what is Caitlyn Jenner?
A man?
A man, or an athlete. Bruce Jenner is an athlete, that's Aries.
Yeah.
That's Aries. Do you know Bruce Jenner? Do you know where Bruce Jenner's from?
No.
He is from Sandy Hook.
Is he really?
Lord.
Yeah.
Wow.
Bruce Jenner's from Sandy Hook.
Holy crap.
Yeah. So is the woman who wrote the Hunger Games novels.
See,
Oh,
that
from
just
Sandy
really
Hook.
gives you a
Isn't that
window
interesting?
in there, doesn't
So
it?
when it goes to Taurus, it's going to change again?
Well, you never know.
I'm going to value my
I think there's a limit to the modification at some point.
It's 11.
Bruce Jenner used to work out at the same YMCA that I did when I was young. That's when he was training for the Olympics. Anyway, but there you go. I mean, so we have the early adopter or the early adaptation with Uranus and Aries. That's exactly what we're going to have to deal with, is transhumanism. By the way, transgenderism is the gateway to transhumanism.
Agreed.
It begins to get us to think about humanity, body, organism in a different way. We begin to accept modification.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, we talked about this yesterday, which is the infusion of things like the RFID chip. It'll be more than that. It won't just be that. It'll be more than that. If you want to be able to, theoretically, has anybody ever seen Gattaca?
Yeah.
This is the society that we're moving towards. Because what they're going to actually do at a gene level, they'll be able to track everything that you have through your, what do you call it, the polymerase chain, right? They're going to be able to track it, read it. And because they can actually edit and splice genes in vitro, they can do that now.
Thank you.
Through technology called CRISPR, you could actually have your theoretical or potential birth defects edited out of your genealogy.
Wow.
It will also come, but you'll have to pay for that, by the way. You'll have to pay for that. It will also potentially come down to being able to see, theoretically now, it's not written in stone, but if your baby is going to be a drag on the system and has more markers for being a medical risk, there's a very good chance you won't be allowed to have that baby. Okay?
Wow.
This is the world that we're moving towards.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean it's going to happen. You know, it doesn't mean it's written in stone. But I'm telling you, the technology is there. And there are people who are just itchy to use this technology.
Right.
They think it will make it a better world. And some of these people are just guided by some form of really distorted altruism. Okay? And some are patently evil. Not all of them are. Some of them really believe in what they're doing, think science is going to make everything better for everyone else.
Not at the highest levels, though.
At the high levels, they know what they're doing. Absolutely. And they've been steering this ship for a long time.
Right.
Yeah, every generation, you know, you go back and there's always kind of this weird sort of transgender cipher in every generation, right? You go back to the 1950s. You would have people like Milton Berle dressing up like a woman.
Yeah. That's
Right,
true.
Bugs Bunny dressing up like a woman. You go back to the 1960s and long hair and hippies and this real fuzzy and blurry line.
Right.
You go into the 70s, you get Bowie and glam rock, right? You get all that. All these things have been going on for a long time.
Right.
Berlin, 1930.
The Weimar Republic, absolutely. That's a whole, that by the way, is an incarnation of Babylon.
Of what? Avalon?
Yeah, Weimar Republic was an incarnate, and we are living in a version of the Weimar Republic right now. And we're actually living in a version of Babylon.
A worse version.
It's not a great one. It's not a great one. So essentially, these are some of the issues we're going to be dealing with Chiron and Aries. Identity. Who's a human? What's a human? It's
Yeah,
all going to be part of it. So it's going to be a very fascinating time in some ways. I mean, we are on the front lines of dealing with issues that are really uncomfortable. Really, really uncomfortable. Like, you know, all right, I'm going to cross the line now. Anybody know who Tommy Sotomayor is?
Yeah.
You do. Okay, Tommy Sotomayor is a really interesting character. He's got a YouTube channel. He's black, and he, like, speaks truth, and he's making people really uncomfortable. Really, really uncomfortable. I like this guy. I like people that speak truth, right? Whatever it is, right? Tommy Sotomayor had this show not long ago. He talks about who can say what in our society. Who can say what? He says at the bottom of the food chain is the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christian male. We are at the bottom. He said they can't talk shit about anybody else. They can talk shit about other white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, but then they cannibalize each other. So he's a really interesting guy.
Right.
So what we're going to have is we're going to have that portion of society saying, you know, I'm tired. You know, the greatest suicide rate over the last 3 years has been white males over 50. It's the biggest, largest group of people suiciding. So we're going to have all these people deciding that they want to untie their tongues during this time. That they want to find their internal peace around what motivates them and gives them their own individuality and their own sense of power. To do that, we have to go really, really, really into the wounded part. Because you can't have that without having compassion. You can't have that without being vulnerable, right? Everybody's got a story to tell. Everybody's been wounded. Doesn't matter what race, what color, what sex, what religion, you've been wounded. You've been rejected. We've all had our Chiron moments. And hopefully, with Chiron and Aries, we'll be able to understand that together, right? Together, where we can theoretically say, we're all wounded. We all have stories to tell. And we can listen, you know, it's really interesting what's going on with, like, Colin Kaepernick and the players in the NFL. The NFL is an Aries sport, right? Warriors. What's happening with Uranus and Aries? They've dealt with CTE, the head, concussions. It's come up during Uranus and Aries run. And while I don't agree with Colin Kaepernick, per se, what I do think is interesting is that they want to have a dialogue. A dialogue. They want to open a dialogue. And I don't know where that dialogue is going, but they're onto something. The dialogue is a bigger piece. It's a bigger piece. They want to come from a social justice place. And they say, we're tired. We're tired of our community being targeted. We're tired of our community being harassed. We want to have a place at the table. That's fine. I think everybody needs a place at the table. But what they really are starting to engage in is this process of a dialogue, We all have our wounds. We all come from a place where our individuality, who we are as people, as humans, has been wounded, degraded, hurt. And hopefully, during this Chiron and Aries time, we can come to the table together. Because ultimately, I think that's our saving grace. Chiron in Taurus, which is your generation, right? That's about the formation of something new. Because Aries is the action. Taurus brings solidification. So we have the potential, and you have the potential, in your Chiron, to ground something new in the world. From a material, see, this is it though. Chiron and Taurus people don't want to be here. I've done readings with Chiron and Taurus people. Why am I here? You know?
That's true.
Yeah.
Like 77?
What's that?
Is that from people in 77?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It's like the whole idea. Are you okay?
Yeah, it's a damn, you're my age.
The whole idea of incarnation and having a body is the most difficult thing for Chiron and Taurus people. So you're going to be.
Understand me.
Well, I mean, I talk to Chiron and Taurus people, and sometimes it's intimacy, sometimes it's being touched, sometimes it's being grounded, having a job. You know, the whole Taurus thing that you have to do every single day, right? But that's going to be your job. Your generation is here to deal with things around the body and food and health and dealing with maybe some form of material restructuring.
I thought it was based off of value, self-worth, and like.
There's some of that too. I mean, it's material values.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but Taurus is the earth, right? It's structure at a fundamental level.
Just a minor question. I'm an old dude. 42 makes me 75.
Yeah,
Our day is over, ain't
that's
it,
right.
mostly?
Pretty much.
So we ain't got nothing to do but just sort of sit back and
Well,
watch.
you're a wise man, though, right? And you should be, theoretically, right? In a society, like, you know a lot.
I do.
I know you do. In a society that's healthy, you're teaching people. You're the guy that's up here. This is what your role would be. People, you know, young people would gather around you and you'd be passing on history. Oral history. That's what your role would be. Unfortunately, you know, getting old has been terribly marginalized in our society.
So, me being born in 67, am I an Aries or Pisces?
You are Chiron and Pisces.
Pisces?
Chiron and Pisces.
Does it matter if I'm an Aries then in Pisces?
Well, if you're an Aries, it's an interesting combination. Because Chiron's gone, you've had your Chiron return. Now it's going to come around, it's going to hit your Aries. When's your birthday?
March 29th.
March 29th. So you're going to get Chiron on your Aries sun. See, so you're going to be, 7 degrees Aries. So it'll be next year.
Next year?
Next year. So that will be an interesting time for you because on some level those are call to action. You know, and you might be called upon to assert yourself, put your ring in the hat, name in the game on some level. And you have to also ask yourself if that's what you want to do. Okay? Because sometimes helping people in that way or being directly engaged is not always the best thing. Sometimes people have to figure that out for themselves. But it'll be interesting for you.
Right.
Do you have children?
Yes.
Do you have any boys?
Yes.
How are they doing?
I don't know. I'm not that close with him.
Okay, so there you go. There's your Chiron conjunction Aries sign, dealing with the male.
Right.
So that's part of what you'll probably have to deal with. Yeah.
So for instance, the Kim Kardashians, that's within that. That's why she's always changing her look and her body with plastic surgery.
That's right, modification.
Oh.
She's not at ease with her body.
And Taurus needs body.
It is the body. It is, Aries is also the body, right? But Taurus is like, okay. So we talked about this yesterday. When you conceive a child, you're conceiving the child in the 8th house. Right? You meet and bond in the 7th house, relationship, partnership. Then you go to the 8th house and you conceive. It's Scorpio's house, it's generation, it's sexuality. Where does that come out? It comes out the opposite side in Taurus. Physical manifestation of birth, 2nd house. In my course, I actually have, I teach the evolution of the wheel with the course I have. And so when you are born, you take the first breath, you incarnate onto the ascendant. You get a rising sign. So for the first part of your life, everybody is Aries for the first part of their life. Because Aries is nothing but pure volition and will, right? You poop, somebody else cleans it up. You cry, you laugh, you don't think about it. You see something, you go like this and you touch it. But there's not a lot of conscious awareness around. You just are. That's the nature of Aries. It's being. Aries is being, right? You get in, when you get to around a year and a half, you move into Taurus. You move into the second house, because guess what happens then? You got to figure out that, not everyone's going to clean up your poop. So toilet training comes into Taurus in the second house. And in that moment, the moment of toilet training is when we become, in some ways, part of this experience where we become conscious of our will. I have to go to the bathroom, right? That's a part of the will. And I'm going to go do that. So that's where it all starts. Taurus, you learn to eat, take care of yourself. You get into Gemini, you meet other kids, brothers, sisters, you go to school, you communicate, you talk, you go to school, you learn the difference between right and wrong, duality. Johnny's a good boy, Johnny's a bad boy. Go to the corner, that's Gemini, duality, right? You go to the fourth house, and you're dealing with your home, your family, you're absorbing traditions, you're taking it on an emotional level. You go to the fifth house, you're dealing with what you love, you play, you experience, you find hobbies, you fall in love. Theoretically, you take a hobby or something that you love, you take it to the sixth house, and you get good at it. You get good at it. And then in the sixth house, you learn how to do something. And this is where we kind of got off the wheel. Back in the old days, before college, we'd go to the sixth house, we would learn a trade, we'd learn a vocation, we'd have a mentor, we'd be able to take care of ourselves. That's the sixth house. Guess what? You get to go to the seventh house, and you can take care of another person. Right? Now you can be married, you have a relationship, whatever. You can take care of business. Then you go to the eighth house, you procreate, you have a kid. You come out of the eighth house, oh my God, I've got this new thing in my life. I need a philosophy. I need an organizing kind of system in my life. We have religion, we have morals, we have dogma, we have spiritual instruction and faith for the individual and the family. And at that point, you're like, okay, I have some morals and scruples. I'm going to go into the 10th house. And I'm going to take my 6th house endeavor and make it a real business. And expand it. Because now I know how to treat people. Now I know how to take care of people. And I can be a successful leader, or I can govern because I have spiritual morals and principles that I've learned in the 9th house. That's how that works. And then once you get to the 10th house, you're at high noon in your chart. And you live your life, and you experience it, and then guess what? You retire. Then you go to the 11th house, and you get to hang out and chill out and go down to the club, meet with your friends, groups, organizations. But theoretically, you get to give back. The 11th house is a house of philanthropy. I've had such a good life. I get to give back now. And I get to share my wealth and my good fortune and spread it around. Because guess what? I'm going to the 12th house. You get to the 12th house, you're leaving the chart. Right? Starting first, this is how the chart works. This is theoretically the cycle of life. Well, what happened is we screwed up with the 6th house. And we went from the 5th house to the 9th house. And the 9th house is education, universities, and colleges. And people skip a really important point with the 6th house, which is learning responsibility and doing something every single day. Right? So what happens now is we have kids going to the 9th house with the birth of college education, which really came online after World War II, the GI Bill. Colleges became big business. And so you go from these kids going to the 9th house, getting some form of education that's not spiritual instruction anymore. And then they go right into the 10th house. They get into work, they get into earning, but they have skipped really fundamental steps along the way, so they're very immature. This is where we went off the wheel. So really what I think is if kids, and some cultures do this, by the way. Like if you're in Israel, whether you like it or not, you're going to be in the IDF. For, 2 years in the IDF? Switzerland, same thing. You're going to become part of the Swiss Army for 2 years. That's a 6th house experience. You're learning discipline. Sometimes you're learning a skill or craft. And then you can go on and do your thing. Okay? So these countries and these cultures understand this to some degree. we've lost touch with it. It'd be really great if we could have a 2-year period for our kids. And not just some kind of timeout. You know, go backpack around Europe, although I think it's dangerous now, but find something for about 1.5 to 2 years where you can actually learn a skill, do something. And then say, hey, I want to go to school now, but I'm a better person for these 2 years. I think that would be very helpful. If you want to, I think we want to bring balance back to our culture. I think that's where we need to go. We need to integrate that 6th house again. Because we love the 5th house. We love our games. We love our distractions. We love our football. We love our gambling. We love our soap operas. We love our loves. And then it just goes, whoom, drops off after the 5th house, and then up to the 9th house. See you later. So let's round it up here. Chiron and Aries. The best thing that each and every one of you can do is be the best you can be. And guess who's going to benefit from that? Your relationships. The opposite side of the umbrella. Okay? So whether you have Chiron in Taurus, or Chiron in Sagittarius, or Chiron in Pisces, or Chiron in Aquarius, we're all dealing with that Chiron and Aries phase. So in order to find out where Chiron is going to be, look at your chart. Find out where Aries is in your chart, and that's where, theoretically, some of your work will take place. There are also angles to Chiron, right? So my challenge with Chiron is I'm going to have Chiron going through my 5th house. Chiron is then raised by Apollo and Artemis. They become his de facto parents. And Apollo and Artemis, they instruct him in everything. Chiron is a master physician, he's a poet, he's a musician, he's a hunter, he's an astrologer. Chiron becomes the most elevated of all the centaurs, who are generally knuckleheads. Because when you're a centaur, you're dealing with what? You're dealing with instinct, and you're dealing with the intellect. Right? That's the nature of Sagittarius. That's Sagittarius' challenge. Most of the centaurs are here. But Chiron manages to do both. And then Chiron becomes the teacher of all the heroes of the Iliad. He becomes their teacher. He becomes a very, very prominent figure in mythology, and he gives up his life for Prometheus. Because Prometheus is getting his liver pecked out, right? Chiron's immortal, and he says to Prometheus, I can't stand this. I will sacrifice myself for you. I will take on your wounds so you do not have to go through, essentially, a daily crucifixion. So Chiron is also self-sacrificing, to some degree. But it has to be like a very high ideal. It can't just be any kind of level of self-sacrifice. Very interesting character. So with Chiron comes gifts. And once you integrate Chiron into your life, the gifts come. So for me, when I went through my Chiron return, one of the things that I did is I started my website. And it was also concurrent at the same day that my Chiron was exact. The same day that Neptune, transiting through Aquarius, was on my Chiron, was the day my father died. So it was a very interesting kind of moment in my life. Getting back to the chirotic crisis or the chirotic dilemma. Most people, instead of going to Uranus to disrupt their lives, will go to the opposite sign. So if you have Chiron in Pisces, there's a flight to Virgo. And let's have structure, order, form, because we don't want to deal with the chaos of Pisces. We don't want to deal with our crisis of faith, our crisis of belief, our crisis of our addictions. We'll go straight to Virgo. But what happens is you can't fully reconcile it. If you have Chiron in Aries, right? Chiron in Aries is the crisis of will, crisis of the body, crisis of being actional. So what happens when you want to resolve Chiron and Aries? You go to Libra, so you go to a relationship. So that you try to somehow suffuse whatever it is you're not activating for yourself. Okay. Chiron in Capricorn. Chiron in Capricorn, people will go, I can't deal with structure, I can't deal with this company, I can't deal with all my responsibility, I'm going to start a family. Well, that's not really going to help you to some degree. So what happens with Chiron is you generally have to embrace Uranus at some point. And that scares the living daylights out of people. Because Uranus is unstructured, unordered, chaotic, destructive. It brings challenge and change to your life. And it is probably the most important thing we can do. Now, sometimes, and I'm actually for me, I was on the Uranian side to some extent with my chirotic crisis, because my life was very unstructured, very informed. I lived the 90s completely off the grid. I didn't pay rent, didn't pay taxes for 10 years of my life. So when I got to a certain stage, I needed structure, I needed form. So here I am, I'm sitting here, I'm talking to you, right? Get here at 10 o'clock. I got a podcast I do every day at 9 a.m. You know, I'm hitting the marks because I had to integrate Saturn. But if you are Uranian, right? If you've lived your life that way, structure and form becomes your friend.
So if it's like for instance, you have Chiron and you opposite to that, you have Uranus, then you need structure.
It can be. You have a Chiron Uranus opposition.
Yeah, Taurus and
I'm not on any schedule.
Scorpio.
I don't.
Uranus
I
and
make my
Scorpio.
own schedule.
Uranus is Scorpio. Your Chiron's in Taurus.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Chiron Taurus generation is very interesting. Every generation of Chiron has its story. Okay? So if you go back to the baby boomers, they have Chiron and Capricorn. Generationally, it's a very powerful group of people. You look at the Chiron and Capricorn people, they're leaders in business, they're leaders in government. You've got George W. Bush and a whole cadre of very powerful executives. Generationally, this would be a group that comes from a time that has been either rulers, leaders in industry. So what they have to do is they have to somehow understand their responsibility, and to some degree, like the wound of Chiron in Capricorn are corporations that don't give a shit about the environment, right? Corporations that have no oversight. So they have responsibility around that from a collective and generational level. The Chiron and Aquarius people, in my estimation, based on my just kind of meanderings in the psychic world and talking to other people, you know, we're connected to Atlantis. The Chiron and Aquarius people are Atlanteans and this is the thing about Chiron, because it's a 7-year cycle roughly, you have group incarnation. So you're actually incarnating with not just you and other people that have the same Chiron, but also either historically or to some degree spiritually are working out the same experience at a group level.
Just a quick question, because you might have said it, but I missed it. What you say generationally, what time frame are you talking?
So it depends on the generation. So 7 years roughly, right? When were you born?
1942.
1942, I'm assuming you have Chiron in Sagittarius.
I wouldn't know.
I'm assuming that. So your generation, Chiron and Sagittarius, the wound there has to do with justice, religion, law, fairness, to some degree treaties, to some extent the expansion of globalization, religion. So that's where the chirotic wound is. So
That makes sense.
one of the things that you would do is you would redefine those things on your own terms.
Which is what I've done.
He's had to.
Yeah, you would redefine them on your own terms.
Yeah. I wasn't asking for me personally. I thought you were talking about a certain, like, people born in the 50s or the
The
60s.
people born in the 50s, mostly Chiron and Capricorn, although later in the 50s it goes into Chiron. and
Okay, because
Aquarius.
those are the leaders today. They're in their early 50s.
That's right. So they have some kind of, well, let's see, Trump's Chiron, where's Trump's? His south node is in Sagittarius. I have to look, I actually have his chart. I'm not going to look at it now.
Get him up
but
tomorrow.
what happens is that if you look at sort of the panoply of all these generations, right, we're all working out some kind of divine algorithm. Because we're all very specific, yet individual and unique. So we're acting out and resolving some kind of resolution about the original wound, which is the fall, theoretically the fall, right? That's what it all goes back to. And there are all variations on it, but we're all sort of mending, coming back to that place. So the Chiron and Aquarius people,
Is that the 60s? What's 60s?
the 60s, it goes Chiron and Aquarius, I think about to 62, 63, and after that it goes into Pisces. We're just getting
Okay.
ready to leave Chiron and Pisces.
Okay.
I think he's a Virgo.
What's that?
Donald
Trump?
Yeah, I think.
We could look at it at the end. So we got this generation of Chiron and Aquarius. I call them sort of they're the refugees from Atlantis. And theoretically looking at things like, data, AI, what else, transgenics, transhumanism, all that stuff that took place on Atlantis, right? Where it all went crazy. Gene splicing, abuse of technology.
Right.
This is a group that says, hey, look, been there, done that. And that's kind of what I talk about. I talked about it yesterday, talking about the perils of unchecked technology, unchecked experimentation.
Yeah, that fits.
The Chiron and Pisces people, these are people that are heretics because they're having to deal with religion in a different way than Sagittarius, more personal. They have to redefine their experience around belief and faith and mysticism. Many of the Chiron and Pisces people have had very damaging relationships and experiences in church. Molestation or complete and utter destruction of faith through the hammer of dogma. So over the course of the last 7 years, they've been redefining that for themselves. And some people with Chiron and Pisces, which I've actually looked at in charts, is that they are going, even though the churches are dwindling in numbers, some of the Chiron and Pisces people are actually going back to church. And in their own way, in their own experience, finding a new place to renew their faith, ultimately. Now that brings us to Chiron in Aries. Okay, so Chiron in Aries, the people that are going through their Chironic return, or will start to, Chiron in Aries was started in 1969, February of 1969, and it ended in May of 1976. So if you're born during that time, you've got Chiron in Aries. And it starts, the Chiron return starts on 4/18/18. That's when Chiron, or when it goes into Aries. And it will be in Aries until June of 2026. So you can see that there is a 7-year cycle between 69 and 76. And there's actually an 8-year cycle between 2018 and 2026. That's the nature of Chiron. It does not have... Chiron and Pluto are the two celestial bodies that do not have a regular timed orbit. Everything else, clockwork, right? Uranus, 7 years. Neptune, 12 years. Saturn, 3 years. Jupiter, 1 year. Chiron and Pluto, sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's shorter. It's the nature of the two. So if we look at what happened between 1916 and 1976, a lot of very interesting things occurred. But let me tell you the generational piece around people that were born during that time. These are wounded warriors. They're wounded warriors. Aries is the body. Aries is our will. It represents the military, the police, pro football. It is sexuality. It is volition. It is the head. It is the body. So the people that came in through Chiron and Aries theoretically have a past of being in wars, right? Wars. They're wounded warriors psychically, maybe physically, and they're here theoretically to resolve conflict, number one, because a lot of these people that are born during that time, that is when Pluto moves into Libra. So they're part of Gen X, and they're dealing with a Pluto-Chiron opposition in many cases. So again, with Pluto and Libra, there's a very strong pull to go to that opposition, right? Because Pluto is a magnetizing planet. So let's just go back in time. 1969 was what? It was the end of the summer of love. 1969, we have Woodstock, we have Charles Manson, we have the beginnings of the death of Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison. The party's over. Altamont comes in. The party is over. And yet, what's really taking place? It's the Vietnam War. And it's during this time, theoretically, with Chiron and Aries, that the United States suffers its first defeat. in a war. It's during Chiron and Aries. So now we have not only the idea of the wounded warrior and the people that came home from Vietnam, their stories, the ones that are still living and still active, you're going to see more of their stories come out during this Chiron transit through Aries. Because we're living, obviously, in a very charged time. And the whole, sort of drumbeat and march to war has everybody kind of walking on eggshells a little bit. And there are going to be groups of people that are going to really not be into this. And these are going to be the older soldiers, or people even coming back from places like Iraq, the first war, the second war. These wounded warriors are going to start to talk about the experience of war and bring it home to people. Because it's a very, very daunting issue and subject, and most people can't even wrap their heads around it. Okay, these are the witnesses of what's taken place.
Yeah.
So during this period, the Vietnam War is winding down, and we are losing that war. That's part of Chiron and Aries, and from that point forward, we get into things like Nixon being impeached, the father of the country. He's a Capricorn. There's a Chiron Capricorn square going on at that point in time. And by the way, we're going to go through a Chiron Capricorn square as well this coming year. Saturn moves into Capricorn. Chiron moves into Aries. Early degrees, bam and slam. Okay? So Donald Trump is probably the closest manifestation of Richard Nixon that we've had since Nixon, even more than Reagan. So the whole idea this is an interesting piece, and Nixon was a Capricorn. So the whole idea with Nixon was that Nixon was the father of the country. That's what happens with presidents, right? They become the father of the country, the de facto father, whether you like it or not, or admit it or not. That's what they are. And the first lady is like the mother of the country. So with Nixon, you have a whole generation of Pluto and Leo, and Leo also represents the father, right? What that generation wanted to do is they wanted to kill the father. That's what happens with Pluto. It's death. Leo's the father. So what do? They killed Nixon. They killed his career. They took him out. So here we go. Chiron and Aries squaring Saturn in Capricorn. And we have Donald Trump in the White House. We're looking at the potential for a major conflict. Even if Trump starts to backpedal, loses his base, they're not going to let up. They're not going to relent.
No, they're not.
They're not going to relent. However, we are also living in a much more transparent culture than we've ever lived in.
Absolutely.
And it didn't take very long for Antifa, who are very violent, to all of a sudden be seen as being very violent. Yeah? So now it's like, well, even the mayor of Berkeley said, they're kind of a terror group. This is Berkeley, right? So we're going to see the backlash of violence. Because Chiron and Aries will teach us that. It'll teach us that violence is not the way. It is not the way. So if there is a group that tends to be violent or wants to exert violence, it's going to kick back on them. So we are going to some degree, be forced to reconcile this whole notion of action, violence, aggression, Chiron and Aries. Let me tell you a little interesting tidbit here. Does anybody know about the Sabian symbols? Sabian symbols were created back in the 1920s by Mark Edmund Jones, and he was one of the first kind of evolutionary astrologers. And he was working with a woman named Elsie Wheeler, who was much older than him, and she was a trance medium. She was lame. She couldn't really walk very well. So Mark Edmund Jones, they've had these things around for years, that each degree of the zodiac has a symbol associated with it. And it's an archetypal symbol. So they weren't the first to come up with that. There were other people. But Mark Edmund Jones wanted to have his own version of it. So he said, I'm going to work with Elsie, who's a medium. And they went to Balboa Park in San Diego, and they sat in his car for a weekend in Balboa. It's a very nice park. So they sat in the car, and it was all double blind. So what Mark would do is he would have a card, like a note card, 3x5 card, and he would have a degree of like a Aries 25, right? But it wouldn't be sequential. He mixed them all up. So he would have this card, and then he didn't know what it was, and she didn't know what it was. So that's double blind. And she would say, well, she would come up, she would go into her state, and she'd come up with a symbol for that degree. Okay? And then Mark would like kind of double check and cross check, and like, okay, refine. And then they came up with this 360 degree sort of mandala of symbols, some of which are very interesting, and some of which make you scratch your head. Dane Rudhyar, who's, I think, probably the greatest astrologer, maybe of all time, after Ptolemy, he came up with his own, he interpreted the Sabian symbols in his own way. He's a big brain, big thinker, a theosophist, and the United States has Chiron and Aries in its chart. The United States is about to go through yet another cycle of its Chiron return. Okay? And it is in the 4th house of the Sibley chart. There are a number of charts for the United States. Some are Sag rising, some are Scorpio rising, some are Gemini rising. I use the Sibley chart, which is Sag rising. So that means Chiron in Aries is in the 4th house of the home. Right? The homeland. So let me give you, so in the Sabian symbols, you generally read for the next degree up. Okay? So the United States, which is interesting, is Aries 20. Aries happens to be what? The 4th month, right? So it's like 420.
Awesome.
So you read up to the next degree, which is 21. Let me read you the symbol for Chiron and Aries at 21. It is a pugilist enters the ring. A pugilist is a boxer. So this is part of our cosmology. This is what we deal with. We deal with what? Violence. Whether it's guns or watching MMA last night in the bar, watching people get their brains knocked out, or football. All right, so let me read you this. This is Rudhyar's interpretation. Here we find potency glorified as muscular strength and will to power, because it is potency operating at a harshly competitive level. It can and often does imply the possibility of defeat or disfiguration. In one sense, the symbol translates into social terms the primordial struggle for the survival of the fittest, adding to it an eagerness for social fame and social power, i.e. money. In another sense, the ring with 2 fighters, and it can be referred to the Tai Chi symbol in the interplay between the yang and yin. Each of the 2 types of energy wins in turn. Victory is always temporary in a dualistic world. This is the first stage of the 5-fold sequence of cyclic phases. Potency and the 2-fold possibilities inherent in any release of power are seen operating at the socio-cultural and emotional level. The symbol reveals man's deeply rooted feeling of admiration and envy for whoever generates overwhelming power. So this is the inherent symbol for this country. We're always looking to what? Fame and fortune, the powerful man, the powerful woman. We're always looking outside of ourselves in this culture. Chiron and Aries suggests, and the return of Chiron for the United States suggests that needs to be internalized. That the looking out for somebody at a great level, at an actionable level, is no longer the thing that can sustain us.
That's right.
That we all have to become what? What is Aries? What is Aries? Aries is the self, right? It's the self. It's the
Back to the
individual.
self.
We have to come back into ourselves. It's vital. We have
Yes.
been through 7 years of Uranus and Aries, where there's a bunch of selves all radically operating to get their voices heard, to the point where nobody can listen anymore. Right? You have on the right, you have a kind of a radical version. We're tired of this. We're tired of being politically correct. We want to untie our tongues. We want to speak our truth. Over on the left, they're saying, you can't speak your truth.
That's right.
Your truth is generating hate. Right? It's a hate speech moniker. So we have these 2 groups now, and we have other groups coming in from these other wings that are all trying to get their rights and their feelings and their opinions heard and to be seen. Everybody wants to be recognized right now. And everybody has a story to tell. There's not one person, not one race, not one sex that hasn't been screwed over at some point in their life. Guarantee you it's planet Earth. And nobody's holding out a box of tissues. That's the way it is. So Chiron in Aries says we must internalize this. Because when we externalize it, whether it's Donald Trump, whether it's Lance Armstrong, whoever, these people are fallible. And they are no longer going to be the solution to our issues. Each and every one of us has to come into our own accountability, our own responsibility, whatever that is. That's a big piece around this. The other piece around this is that, again, Aries is the sign of the warrior. It's war. Guess what happens? It's in the 4th house. It's in the homeland. The war is coming home. The war is coming home. The next conflict is not necessarily going to be out there, although it could happen. Syria, North Korea, Iran, those are all hot spots. The globalists want to flip them. They want to flip them. They want to get the leaders out of there. They want to get them into the world banking system. But it's home. This is where the conflict is going to be, unfortunately.
What about 9/11? Did that have to do with?
9/11 is an interesting bird
That's a whole
altogether.
nother-
9/11 is an interesting story.
Yeah.
So there's no squares to Chiron or anything?
No. The 9/11 chart, we had an opportunity because we came up, right? So I think the Saturn was at 18 degrees Gemini, I think, during 9/11. So we had Saturn in Sagittarius. We've gone through, it's almost done now. Moves into Capricorn in the end of December. We had the Saturn opposition. We had the Saturn opposition to the original Saturn with Chiron and Gemini. We had an opportunity. And guess what happened? Donald Trump squandered it.
Oh,
He started talking about it. He brought it into the public arena. He threatened Jeb Bush at a debate.
I love that, by the way.
He said,
That
"You
was
don't
a
wanna go
beautiful
there."
thing.
Me too.
Well, that was it. Jeb Bush had 3 tires punctured. That was the 4th one. And he was on the side of the road after
That
that.
was a beautiful thing.
Okay. But here's what happens with Trump. Trump talks about the dancing Saudis. They weren't Saudis. They weren't dancing Arabs.
No.
They're actually dancing Israelis.
Yep.
Yeah,
I hate
they
to
were.
break the news to you.
The Mossad.
So Trump is covering.
Yeah.
He knows exactly who did it.
Yeah.
He knows where the bodies are buried. Rudy Giuliani's his best buddy.
I know.
Rudy's up to his 3rd eye. Larry Silverstein is a real estate buddy.
Yeah.
And Trump speaks fondly about Larry Silverstein.
Yes, he does.
So what happened is that Trump was running cover for 9/11 during a time where the aspect could actually come up. The Saturn opposition. It's unfortunate. So the only other thing we could look to for 9/11 is the progress chart. And eventually, I think the progress chart for 9/11 right now is Libra, I think around 26 on the ascendant. So 3 to 4 years, that progress chart, ascendant will be Scorpio. And so maybe 3 to 4 years from now, when Scorpio becomes the progressed ascendant for 9/11's chart, we can actually find out more about, people know what happened. If you have any kind of intellect, desire, curiosity, you dive in, takes you maybe about a week or so to sift through everything, and we may differ around certain things, but it's a concerted effort between the government at that time, Dick Cheney, Don Rumsfeld, the Bush family, the Israelis, the Mossad, and the Saudis.
And the money.
And money for sure, but those are the
Money.
3 main players, and of course the intelligence agencies.
The gold.
Right?
The gold that was underneath.
Yeah, exactly. So you look at what they did. They set up like a cookie cum trail, Muhammad Atta, all those guys down in Florida.
Oh, yeah.
Right? They had to establish the fact that they actually went to those schools in order to somehow create a paper trail. Right? But those guys didn't fly the planes. In fact, there were even no planes. Sorry,
No.
there are no planes.
Nope.
Not one plane at all. And that building, by the way, if you go back in time and look at pictures of the Twin Towers when they were standing, there are angles where the sun is setting on the western side. And you can see that the Twin Towers are hollow. They're hollow. There were offices at the top, and offices at the bottom. The rest of the Twin Towers were not occupied. It was a complete trick.
So Bush was in, he knew everything. was
They
going
know
on.
everything. They know everything. Absolutely.
Wow, it's like shaming himself, like, I don't know.
Well, hey, so that takes us way down a rabbit hole.
Yes.
I want to stay on point.
Really good
We have
story.
to.
I want to stay on point. But just to round that off, right?
Yeah.
There is a time coming where that might actually come up again in the progress chart. Let's get back into Chiron and Aries. So one of the things that we're going to have to deal with is we're going to have to deal with what? We're going to have to deal with Saturn and Uranus with Chiron and Aries. We've established what the two of them are, right? Uranus is what? It's radical. You're dealing with radical Aries, radical action. So you're going to have this one energy that wants change. Then you have Saturn over here. Structure, right?
Okay.
Form. That's the government. And that's an Aries component to the government. And that says unequivocally no. So what are we talking about? Saturn and Aries could become a manifestation of the police state. Okay? Trump has he loves his police, man. Donald Trump loves his police, loves the army. He recently loosened the bonds and strictures on what police can use on a local situation, meaning that the police are now more free to militarize than ever before. So he's militarizing the police. This is what's happening.
Yeah.